Years ago, I was out running some errands, and it was a Monday, and I had my daughter with me in the back seat, asking lots of questions. She was 2, maybe 3 at the time, and we're driving on a Nut Road, so just out that way. And we go by that cemetery there, Morris Cemetery, I guess, and we see this big crowd of people all dressed in black standing around a grave. And my daughter asked me, the toddler question, "What do I see?" I said, "Well, baby, it's a funeral. Somebody's died." And she's like, And so she starts to probe some more, and she's like, "Well, what's the matter?" And I'm like, "Well, there's a teachable moment. I'm a pastor." I'm like, "All right, let's do this. You see, baby, people die. Mommies and daddies, brothers and sisters, it's very sad, but in this world, we die. And until Jesus comes back, we bury people in the ground, and then Jesus will come back, and those who believe in him will be raised again into new life." And her question to me, which I think is just the brilliance of a child, says, "What's the matter with people?" Do you hear that question? This, coming from the mouth of a 3-year-old, is a brilliant question. Like, if everybody dies, there must be something wrong with everybody. What's the matter with people? Even a 3-year-old can see that there's something tragically wrong with us, that there's something totally unnatural about burying a mommy, a daddy, or a brother or sister into the ground. Totally unnatural. But it's not just death, it's life. So I've been a pastor full-time for over a decade now, and part of that is I get to pull back the veil. I get to see into people's lives. I get to see into so many of your lives. And can I just say, racism, sexism, abuse, addiction, violence, depression, anxiety, corruption, broken families, perversion of every sort, some you can't even imagine, whole systems of injustice. They aren't just out there somewhere. They're in here. They're in here. Don't worry, I didn't tell my 3-year-old that. But I was thinking it, because what's the matter with people is not just what's the matter with people. The question is, what's the matter with me? What's the matter with us? And this question is the question that we're going to look at for the next 2 weeks in our text in Genesis chapter 3. And let me say, this is such a simple question that even a 3-year-old can see there's something tragically wrong with humanity. And Genesis chapter 3 is going to give us sounds like a very, very simple answer. It's a simple story. So let me just be upfront. This is a story about a naked woman talking to a snake about a piece of fruit. Just let that sink in. I mean, it's everything about this story makes it sound laughable. Now, I'm not going to take the time to lay out all the arguments for the historicity or why Christians think this is historic generally. I commend that article to you. I will say one thing before we just discard this as myth, though. Let me point out that this story, if it's true in any sense at all, then it has to be historic in some sense. So the whole point of the story is to tell the story about how there was a time when sin was not, and then it entered into creation. That there was sinlessness, and then it was sinful. That it was whole, and then it was broken. That creation was complete and good, and then that was not good. That there was no shame, and there was shame. The whole point of the story is to point to a moment, to say that there was a time when it wasn't like this, that God didn't make the world like this. To remove historicity is to remove the whole point of the story. So I just want to ask you, please do not confuse simplicity for stupidity. Some of the most profound truths are put in the simplest of terms. The other thing I want to just avoid here is what C.S. Lewis calls chronological snobbery. Do you know that? The idea that whatever's latest is best, or because we are further along, we know better than them, that, oh, those ancient Near Eastern Bronze Age sheep herders, they were so stupid that they could take a story like this, but that's just not true. The fact of the matter is that after hundreds of years of scientific advancement, science still cannot answer the most fundamental questions of life. Science, with all of its sciences, with all of its brilliance and advancement and education, cannot answer the question of my 3-year-old. Let that sink in for a minute, okay? So I want to lay out, this is reading Genesis in a scientific age, I want to lay out kind of the scope of this question before we get in, and it would start in the 1600s. So when we're going to ask this question, what's the matter with people? In the Western world, we would start about the time of the 1600s, about the time when Rene Descartes, was sitting in an oven saying, I think, therefore I am. And this is the birth of modernity and the birth of enlightenment, the birth of the triumph of reason and science as we know it. About that time, we meet this grumpy guy. His name's Thomas Hobbes. And he says, you want to know what's wrong with people? They're fundamentally wicked, all of them. You, wicked, you. That's his answer, Thomas Hobbes. In fact, he writes a book called Leviathan. Here's the actual cover of it. The Leviathan, the whole point is that what are people like? Well, people as a whole are like a giant chaotic sea monster trying to consume everyone. What is the natural state of man? War. And what's the only way to stop people from killing each other and lying and hating and murdering one another? You need a strong government. You need a king with a sword in his hand who's going to tame the lion. Right? 1600s, this philosopher, scientist says this. And then if you follow it along about 100 years, though, the French really don't like this idea. Partially because it's English, and partially because they have a list of kings who are just terrible kings. Terrible. So in the 1700s, we meet this guy, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. And he says, no! You want to know what's wrong with people? It's kings with swords in their hands. You don't know what's wrong with people? It's the government. It's the man. It's big business. It's society. So he writes this book called The Social Contract. And he says, if you want to know what's wrong with people, it didn't happen at a tree. It happened at a fence post. He says, the first time someone took a piece of land, put a fence around it, said, this is mine. He says, that is the cause of all human evils and ills. It's social contracts. It's the idea that people, the governments and all these systems, they're the things that create greed, murder, division of every sort. He believed that people are not fundamentally wicked, as Hobbes said, but people are, and this is the picture, tabula rasa, which means a blank slate. So when you're born, you're just blank. Just ready to absorb whatever the world puts on you. And then your parents and the government, society, media, it writes a story that shapes who you are. That's what makes you good or bad, he would say. You're a blank slate. And so from this comes the idea, very, very popular idea, that if we were to remove all the things of society, if you were to take away media, take away government, take away ownership, take away possessions, take away your clothing, if we were to eat, like be all natural, hippie, granola, local, organic, right? If we were to get there, then you would find, what would you find? You would find this, the noble savage. The idea that if you remove all the trappings, if you go deep enough into the great American wilderness, you will find someone who is pure and right and noble and true. If you go far enough into the farthest away you can from human society, and you go to the furthest reaches of an alien moon, you will find this. This is the noble savage. So anthropologists, they took this seriously for 200 years. This was like, this is what we believe. This is how man is. You're a blank slate. We're looking for the noble savage. So they go traveling all over the world. And the problem is when anthropologists start doing studies, they realize, Well, these noble savages that they find, like in the Philippines or in the jungles of Brazil, there's some odd things. Like, for example, they have a higher murder rate than inner city Chicago. That doesn't seem right. And yet this idea of the noble savage, of you're a blank slate, that you start off neither good nor bad, that this society's forming you, that any evil in society is because of society, not because of you, those ideas literally shape psychology, politics, education, parenting. Parenting. You can be anything you want to be. Oh, Johnny's not bad. It's because of all of his friends. Shapes these things for generation after generation. And then in 1975, E.O. Wilson, a biologist, threw a turd in the punch bowl. You know the phrase? Yeah. And he wrote a book called Sociobiology, in which he argued, it's not what Hobbes said. People are not innately wicked, and it's not what Rousseau said. It's not because of social influences that they do what they do, but our behavior is the result of evolution. So why do people do what they do? It's the same reason dogs circle before they lay down. It's the same reason that a cat, if you put a little laser beam on the floor, chase it around. It's inherent, it's evolutionary, they would say. So what's the matter with people? The answer is millions of years of evolution. And what people, though, why is this a turd in the punch bowl? Because it's threatening. This threatens everything. And I'm not talking threatening to Christians, because it clearly is, but it's threatening to the academia, to sociology, to other sciences, to sociology, anthropology. Like, they all throw a fit over this. And why? Because this is cracking open the door to the possibility that much of the evil done by humans is natural. Totally natural. It forces the question, what if people are naturally violent, racist, adulterous? What if the strong destroying the weak is normal, natural, biologically rooted? So, we've covered 400 years, but then in the last 40 years, advances in genetics, psychology, neuroscience begin to press this issue beyond capacity, which brings us to the treatise of a great contemporary thinker, Lady Gaga. So in 2011, Lady Gaga wrote the super mega hit, Born This Way. And in it, the lyrics, don't be fooled by the simplicity here, the lyrics sing a song that represents the affirmation of millions of Americans, what they believe about human nature, right? Let's pay attention to this. My mama told me when I was young, we are all born superstars. Now imagine this, a millennial who thinks she was born a superstar. I thought about giving out superstar words to all the millennials who come today. You're a superstar just for coming. But I digress. My point is Rousseau would be proud. Rousseau would be so proud. You know, she said, Hobbes is wrong. People aren't fundamentally wicked. People are good. When they're born in the image of God. They're born superstars. You don't need a sword to beat someone around. You're a fundamentally good person. But then she pushes this. She says, there's nothing wrong with loving who you are. And this is her mother speaking to her. She said, because he, God, made you perfect, babe. I'm beautiful, she affirms. Because God makes no mistakes. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. And if you have any question about what she means there, she'll repeat that phrase about 20 times in the song. I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. So follow this logic. We're quickly leaving Rousseau in the dust. She started with some Rousseau over here, but she goes way beyond Rousseau. Rousseau says you're a blank slate. She says, no, you're perfect. You're a superstar. And she moves on. She's not saying you're a blank slate. She's saying sociobiology. If I was born this way, if it's my genetic predisposition, if I can point to a neurological basis for the way I behave, if I can point to an evolutionary reason for my psychology, then it must be morally good. God must approve. So she argues from a socio-biological basis on the understanding of race, gender, sexual preferences, and you could add several other categories to that. And if there's any confusion, again, she says again, I'm on the right track, baby. I was born this way. And she finishes with these words, same DNA, but born this way. Same DNA, but born this way. Just to make sure we know this is a socio-biological basis for morality. That's what she is arguing. So if you ask Lady Gaga, what's the matter with people? She'd say, nothing. You are perfect. Don't let anyone tell you anything else. You're a superstar. You, superstar. And in fact, if there's a biological reason for what you do, then it's good. It's right. It's true. You should embrace it. You should love it. So tell me, let's pull this back to science and the topic at hand. What happens when you look at the research that says that the most violent criminals have different brains, literally different brains? They have a deformed amygdala. They have a different prefrontal cortex. It's different. That you can argue very, very clearly, very convincingly that they were born this way with a predisposition towards violence, towards murder, rape, and the like. What happens when you say, wait, they were born this way. They're a superstar. They're perfect. They're supposed to love themselves. Don't tell them that's bad. What about the mounting evidence that suggests there's a genetic basis for depression and alcoholism? What if they were born this way? So evolutionary psychologists are going to suggest, they're going to push this further. They're going to suggest that there's nothing more natural in our world than racism, violence, and adultery. So suddenly Lady Gaga's anthem, which is supposed to be about freedom and beauty and greatness of humanity, becomes the song of every racist, every abuser, every unfaithful spouse. So on the one hand, let me just lay out the problem here. On the one hand, we want to affirm with Gaga, you're onto something. People are good. There's goodness in every person. There's value. There's worth in every person. But you're off on something. There's something wrong with us. Like, there's evil in us. There's no denying it at this point. It's in us. It's in our desires, in our thoughts, in our bodies, in our DNA, in the way that we just live today. There's something in us that's very wrong. You're good, but you're broken. And we need an answer that can not only lay out that you're good, but you're broken, but a hope. What does it mean to get back to goodness? And frankly, science offers us no explanation for those facts. Which leads us to Genesis chapter 3. What Rousseau, Wilson, Gaga, and generations of psychologists, sociologists, scientists of all stripes could not explain, Genesis chapter 3 is going to explain to us in 24 verses. Watch this. Now the serpent was more crafty than any of the wild animals the Lord God had made. So remember last week we finished with humanity. They're good. They're very good. They're made in the image of God. They're standing naked and unashamed in a garden. And the word for naked in Hebrew is arumim. But this serpent shows up. Enter the serpent. And what's he described as? Crafty. Arum in Hebrew. So when we see this serpent, the first thing you need to know is that we see this serpent, there's reason to believe that it's more than a garden variety snake. Like if you read other ancient Near Eastern literature from that time period, there's reason to believe, we can't be conclusive on this, but there's reason to believe that the original audience would have seen something like a dragon or even Leviathan, like this giant coiling sea serpent. Yeah, you can read Job 41, Psalm 74, Psalm 89, Psalm 104, Isaiah 27. All of these have echoes of like sea monster dragon language in a creation context. But whatever we think about it in that original context, when we read the rest of the Bible, there's no question that this serpent is none other than Satan. If we have any question, we can go to Revelation chapter 20, where John will describe the dragon, the ancient serpent, this one, who is the devil or Satan. He makes a direct correlation between that serpent, that caused this and the serpent that will be destroyed at the end of time. So much could be said about this, but all the text wants us to see is that this serpent is crafty, arum. He's got knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil. He's shrewd. And this wordplay, arum, arumum, suggests that he sees that they're naked and he wants to expose them. He wants to enlighten them. He said to the woman, "Did God really say to you, you must not eat from any tree in the garden?" So you know that moment when you receive a text message and you're like, is this person mad at me or are they really happy? I can't tell. Did they just accidentally leave it on all caps or you know what I mean? You get this if you don't start using emojis in your text messages, you have no idea the sense of what they're saying there. And this week someone shared with me this text message. It's from a girlfriend to a boyfriend. And she starts out, she says, hey, I think we need to spend some time apart, just out of the blue. Sends this to him. And he's like, oh, nice. Dumping me over text. Classy. Whatever. I wanted to be done with you anyways. And then she said, well, I meant to write spend some time apart at Pat's, not apart, but this has been enlightening. And then he says, oh, just kidding. Just kidding. Yeah. So when you get a text, you need context to understand what it means. That it's really, really easy to misread a text. And when we get this, all we get is a text that says, did God really say you must not eat from the tree in the garden? But when you literally read it in Hebrew, it doesn't say that. It says, let's read this carefully. It says, doubtless God said to you, you must not eat from any tree in the garden. Literally in Hebrew, it's not a question. It's a strong affirmative. Doubtless, surely, indeed, God said to you, you must not eat from any tree in the garden. Now here's the problem with this. Martin Luther, the great theologian, beer drinker, translator guy, he came to this text and says, I can't translate it. I cannot translate it. Direct quote here, he says, the serpent uses the word doubtless as though to turn up its nose, jeer, and scoff. That he takes the word doubtless, and he says doubtless, but he means just the opposite. That he uses the word doubtless to instill doubt. That he takes the normal sense of the word and he inverts it. That there's a textbook definition for this. Do you know what this is called? Sarcasm. Sarcasm. This is when you're hey, we're going to have to stay late at work tonight. And you're like, great. I didn't have anything else going on. Great. By which you mean, that's not great. I have lots of other things to do tonight. Right? So he says, doubtless. Surely this is what God did. Isn't this what God did? You know how he is. Can you believe him? God, he's trying to limit us. He knows we could be so much, but he doesn't want us to really experience life. Surely this is what God did. So the serpent, what is he doing here? He's not asking a question. He's not even making an argument. He's insinuating something. He's scoffing. This is the equivalent of you telling a coworker, I really do believe Genesis is true. And they're like, wait, you have more than a third grade education and you believe that Genesis is true? You believe in talking snakes and naked people? Now, is that an argument? No, it's not an argument. It's insinuating that anyone who believes that must be really, really stupid or uneducated, and they thought you were smarter than that. The whole point is that it's not an argument. It's a put down. It's scoffing. Get this. It's not an argument. It's an emotional attack. But it's wildly popular and enormously powerful. I want you to consider for a minute just what are your greatest doubts? What are the things that just haunt you, you can't seem to shake? Your greatest doubts. I'm willing to bet that for most of us, they're not serious analytical arguments about the existence of God or about this or that. But it's emotional attacks. How could a good God let this happen? How could a good God do this? God can't be good. So, like I said, I've been in full-time ministry for, I don't know, something like 13 years now. And I can tell you that people are much, much more likely to walk away from the faith, not because they heard some brilliant argument against it, but because of an emotional attack. The woman said to the serpent, "We may eat fruit from the tree in the garden, but God did say, 'You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not touch it, or you will die.'" Now let's play a game. This is one of my favorite games here. It's called True or Not True. I bet you can guess the rules here. All right, can you guess? Yeah, okay, so let's just practice. My name is Paul. True or not true? Yeah, good. Okay, so we're ready for this. All right. You're at church. True or not true? I'm the best preacher you've ever heard. No, don't do it. Okay, sorry. I was going to bait you on that one. All right, so let's do true or not true. This is what the woman said. She said, "We may eat fruit from the trees in the garden." True or not true? True. Now, just be careful here. And in chapter 2, when God says it, he says, "Any tree eating you may eat." Like, what's his emphasis? Freedom, go, eat. And so she minimizes the freedom a little in this, but it's basically true. God did say, "You must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden." True or not true? True. He did say that. True or not true? And God said, "You must not touch it or you will die." True or not true? Yeah, not true. Well, kind of true. He did say you will die. Actually, he didn't say you will die. He said, dying you will die. You will certainly die. You will die the death. That's what he said. So she minimizes that a little. But then she adds this phrase, "You must not touch it." Why do you think that is there? Why do you think in the original temptation, what does the woman do? She slightly gets God's word wrong, and then she adds something to it. Why do you think God, when he's going to show us what temptation is like for all time, he wants us to see that? Don't miss this. From the very beginning, people have been making up man-made rules to bolster their relationship with God, and it does not work. Legalism does not work. If it did, friends, then we'd have a dress code for GVF, and we'd all be like wearing denim and homeschooling, and we would all follow the same rules, friends. But it doesn't work. Have you ever noticed, in fact, just the opposite? Have you ever noticed the biggest perverts, the most atrocious sinners, the stories that make you shiver, so often come from the most buttoned-up, conservative, fundamentalist, rule-following Christians ever? We don't know what happened to Buck. He was an elder at the church. He always wore his hat. He was there every Sunday. He only read the King James Bible. He didn't own a TV, homeschooled the kids, and then he did boom, boom, boom. Yeah. Well, we've heard that story. It's not even funny because we've heard it so many times, over and over and over. Read the Gospels. Who in the Gospels are the most perversely wicked people? The Pharisees. Those who had the most man-made rules. Why? Because legalism does not work. It does not make you righteous. It does not make you right with God. And so now that he's got her all twisted up on what's true and what's not true, he's going to flat out lie to her. He says this, "You will certainly not die," the serpent said to the woman. He directly inverts. God said, "You will certainly die. Dying, you will die." And he says, "No, dying, you will not die. For God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil." What's the serpent saying there? He's saying, God knows. God knows that this is going to set you free. God knows that this is the secret to life. He's holding this back for you. He doesn't care for you. He doesn't want you to be all that you could be. He doesn't want you to flourish. He's not going to meet your needs, your deepest desires. If you want to get it, you've got to reach out and take it for yourself. You know, if you listen to him, you're going to live in this submission your whole life. But this is obviously a lie. Because when they eat of it, they do not become more. They do not become more like God. They become more like the serpent. It's a lie, but what is the lie here? Let's go back to this. What is he trying to argue, God doesn't exist? Atheism? Nope. Doesn't touch that one. Does he go after God's law? God's laws, they're just relative. You can really, what's true is what's true to you. Whatever's true to you, that's true. He doesn't argue that. He doesn't go after God's power. He doesn't say, God can't possibly give you what you want in life. God can't possibly deliver. What's he go after when he goes after the woman? He says, you can't trust God. He won't give you what you really, really want. He doesn't want what's best for you. He has his own agenda. He doesn't love you. You can't just accept what he says. The fundamental temptation is not atheism. It's not antinomianism, rejecting God's law. The fundamental temptation, the root temptation, the temptation under all the temptations is to doubt God's character, to doubt God's goodness. Naturally, you don't have to work on this. You love what is good. You love what is beautiful. You love what is true. You do. You don't have to do any work on that. But if you do not believe that God is trustworthy, if you do not believe that he is beautiful, if you do not believe that he is kind and good, you will not worship him. You will not desire him. You will not love him. And if you do not love God, you are lost. And we live in a lost world. Do you hear this? What's worse than becoming an atheist? It's believing in a God who is angry and mean and judgmental and against your freedom. It's believing that God does not care, that God's absent, that he thinks very little of you, that God is evil. So we haven't even gotten to the juicy part of this text yet, but I do want to point out this. When we come to that big question that my daughter asked, that is just this profound question about humanity, what's the matter with people? We don't have to go any further, and we've already seen in Genesis chapter 2 that people are created good. They are created in the image of God. They are very good. They're given this worth and value and this duty and all this. They are good, but we can see already something's going astray here. Something's going wrong, and the root of it has to do with what we think and feel about God. It has to do with our, here's the word, relationship with God. And I know to our modern ears this sounds funny, but I want you to think about what this text is actually saying here. It's actually saying that if there is a God who created all things and ordered the universe, that if you cut yourself off from him, from his ordering of the universe, if you lose that relationship with him, you lose your relationship with the order, the logic of all things, with reality itself. And what happens is when you cut yourself off from the creator is what we would call decreation. It's dust that he put together into a human and breathed life into him. What's the opposite of that? It's death. It's a human turning back into dust. It's chaos. What's the opposite of bringing together a man and a woman in marriage? It's divorce. That creation itself starts rending at the seams when we stop believing that God is good. When our relationship with the author of creation gets twisted, then our relationship with ourselves, with others, and with creation itself gets twisted. Once you leave his created order, you head towards chaos. Chaos. When the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and pleasing to the eye and also desirable for gaining wisdom, she took some of it and ate it. Now, think about this fruit for a minute. What do we know about this fruit? Almost nothing. What fruit do you think it was? Pomegranate? Lemon? Some say apple. You know why people think it was an apple? In the Latin translation, the word for apple and the word for evil are almost identical. It's like malum and melum, right? So they thought, it's an apple. We don't know what kind of fruit it was, and the point of this text is that it doesn't matter. What do you need to know about this fruit? You need to know that it was good. It was good for food. I mean, it was pleasing to the eye. It looked good, and it was desirable for gaining wisdom, which says it was a temptation at every level for this woman and for the man. That it was good. So why do we need to know that this fruit was good? What's so important about this? This tells us something about sin and about evil here. And I want you to hear this. Evil is not a thing created. It's not like, oh, it's an evil apple. Like you touch the juice and you become evil. Right? It's not an evil apple. It's a good apple. So what makes this evil or fruit evil? It's taking something outside of the created order that God set it in. It's wanting a good thing outside of the created order. It's wanting a good thing apart from God. It's wanting a good thing on your own terms. It's twisting the created order. This is really, really important. This is saying that God did not create evil. He created all good things, but all the good things are meant to be used within their designated purposes. And when you take something out of those purposes, then creation itself begins to devolve. What makes the fruit evil is not the fruit itself. So let's talk about what is sin? What happens at this tree here? The simplest answer is there's the legal view, right? What happened? What happened right there? She broke a law. God said, don't. She did. She broke a rule. And is that true? It's absolutely true. She broke God's law. So in the most basic view, you can say sin, evil is breaking God's law. But here's the thing. If that's all sin is, if God makes some arbitrary laws and says, follow these, doesn't it kind of feel like the serpent might have a point? Like he's just trying to control you. But it's more than that. When you look into it, when you dig into it, it's not just arbitrary rules. That God has a created order. That sin is more than an arbitrary law, breaking an arbitrary law. That laws are in harmony, the Hebrew word shalom, with creation itself. That there's a way to do life, a way to experience fullness and joy. And sin is going against God's created order. That sin is living, acting, thinking, believing in ways that you were never created to act, think, believe. When I was teaching high schoolers, I used to always pull out the saw at this point. And you say, what's the purpose of this saw? And they'd be like, cutting wood. And then I'd say, now what if I were to brush my teeth? Like little bits of teeth and blood are shooting everywhere, right? Like, is the saw evil? No, but what you're doing is evil, right? It's not designed for that purpose. And so what is this? This is a mouth. What's it designed for? It's designed for speaking blessing, not curses. And when you speak curses, you're doing it outside of what God created to do. It's designed to speak truth, not lies. What are these? These are eyes designed to see the beauty of God, not designed to lust. When you lust with Him, you're outside, you're using it for the wrong purpose. It's sin. What are these? These are hands. What are they designed for? They're designed to work and make things and help others and be generous and hug, not to hit, not to steal, not to abuse, not to overpower and dominate. God created us to love one another. And when we think evil thoughts about another person, this is not loving. This is outside of created order. It is sin. So when we ask the question, what's the matter with people? The first thing we can say with Lady Gaga is people were created perfect. They were superstars. They were made in the image of God. But what we see in this scene here is that somehow the relationship with God has been twisted. And when you twist the relationship with God, it twists everything else. So it's not just like, oh, my soul is darkened. Now I think bad thoughts or I feel bad things. No, your DNA's jacked up. Your brain's messed up. You have physical, biological problems now. Every aspect of who you are is now touched by this twisting, this brokenness, this sin, this rebellion against God. And every bit of you is broken, and every bit of you needs redeemed. This is the Christian teaching of resurrection. This is why you don't just need a new heart, as Ezekiel says and Jeremiah says, but you need a new body. And Jesus Christ, when he comes back, he's going to resurrect the dead. So what's the matter with people? In a word, we're fallen. Watch this. She gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. I'm going to preach a whole sermon on this sometime. Just this one line. That scumbag. Right? You see this whole scene, and you see his wife getting railroaded, and what's he doing there? The lazy, no-good bum, the passivity of man at the root of sin. Men, are you just sitting there watching your family get railroaded and run over? But I'm too scared, or I'm too lazy, or I'm too busy watching TV. I'm going to stop. Verse 7. Then the eyes of both of them were open, and they realized they were naked, so they sewed fig leaves together and made coverings for themselves. So let's get what's happened here. Sin, it's a declaration of independence from God. It's saying, God, we don't trust you. You're not good enough. You're not going to give us what we really want. We've got to find our own way. So we're going to go to the tree. We're going to take what we want because we can choose our own way. It's a declaration of independence. And my favorite and metaphor of this is it's an astronaut who's like tethered to the ship, and he's like, I can't take it anymore. This is too confining. So he cuts himself free and he flies. He's like, this is so awesome. It's great, unlimited freedom, followed by certain death. Certain death. And that's where they're headed. They've cut themselves off from God, the author of life. Death is coming. So what's the matter with people? Why is everyone, every daddy, every mommy, every brother, every sister going to be buried in the ground if Jesus Christ doesn't come back? Sin. We've cut off our relationship with God. Ever since this moment, people have been trying to cover themselves up. They realize something is their eyes are open, and they suddenly see the shame, suddenly feel fear, insecurity. Suddenly, it's not just, I'm trying to cut myself off from God, but you're naked too. And then they're exposed. And so generation after generation, we have covered ourselves up with so many fig leaves. Jobs, a spouse, that spouse, they'll make me someone. Kids, oh, if my kids succeed, then I'm somebody. Even clothing, possessions, all the things we chase after to cover our own insecurities, our own fear. Every person since Adam has followed Adam's lead. All have sinned. All have sought to make themselves God. All have doubted God's goodness. All are bent and twisted in desperately wrong ways. And that is the bad news. But the good news is that we are not like some sociobiologist who says, yeah, you're really evil. But we have an answer. The good news is that into our broken, twisted world came a man, and one, what the scriptures, the Apostle Paul will call a second Adam. Someone who came in, and here's one man who, unlike everyone else in our broken world, he wasn't twisted in the way we're twisted. He wasn't broken in the way we're broken. In a world of brokenness, he was whole. He was complete. He never doubted God's goodness. He never did. He followed God perfectly. He was the fullness of the image of God. He was whole. He was complete. He was perfect. And for our sake, he came so that we could be restored in the image as sons and daughters, as kingdom of priests, so that we could be restored to that image as sons and daughters. He became a servant so that we could be free. He was sold for 30 pieces of silver so we could find healing. He was beaten and scourged so we could be blessed. He became a curse so that we could be clothed, not with fig leaves, but clothed in righteousness. He was stripped naked and hung on the cross so that we might live. He died. And I want you to just see the poetry here. We're going to finish with communion, the very symbol that Jesus Christ, the second Adam, the perfect man, came, lived the perfect life, died for us, rose again, giving us the promise that he wants to restore the image in us. He wants to restore us to what we are, not just what we were created to be, but even beyond that. He wants to bring us to resurrection glory, that he wants us to live in harmony with the way God made us to be. That when we come to this table, we recall the words of the fall. She took some and she ate it. But at this table, we remember that Jesus Christ, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, gave it to his disciples, saying, "Take and eat. This is my body." That first act of taking and eating, of disobedience that declared their independence from God, he's going to undo it by saying, "Take and eat. This is your act of dependence on me." This is the act that says, I'm going to restore all things. When you come back into my order, when you repent of trying to do it on your own, repent of trying to cover yourself up, then I will cover you with my righteousness. When you repent of trying to do it on your own, I'm going to show you the way to life that is truly life. I'm going to lead you into a life of flourishing. So come, take, and eat.